Strap in and get ready for another amazing edition of the Mistake-Free Real Estate Podcast as you listen to Matthew Pollard, the rapid growth guy. But remember, it's rapid growth in the face of uncertainty, and I know you're going to get so many gems. Do not play this at 1.5. Matt's a fast talker with tons of knowledge. It's going to come right at you hot and heavy. Here it is. Enjoy. Hey everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Mistake-Free Real Estate Podcast. I am your host, Marck, and today, super excited to be joined by my friend Matthew Pollard. Matthew is a world-renowned speaker, and Matt, you are known as the rapid growth guy because you've helped countless businesses achieve exponential growth. Look, can you start off by just sharing with us some key strategies and approaches that entrepreneurs often overlook to get them to their growth potential?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that one of the biggest things that people struggle with is usually a lot of people go into business because they want to create a great 6-figure, 7-figure income, really in a business that revolves around them, their family, and their life. And perhaps they went into business for themselves because they were working for someone and they just weren't happy with the way that things were being done. And they went, oh, I'll do it myself. Or they just wanted the freedom that running their own business provides. But usually they're great at their functional skill. And because of that, they may bring clients from their past business. They may tap their Rolodex, but then they struggle to get new clients. And what they find themselves in is this endless hamster wheel of struggling to find interested people, trying to set themselves apart, trying to make the sale, and really feeling like people only care about one thing, price. And a lot of times that leads to people starting to give up on the fact that they really can create a successful business, or really stopping enjoying what they love to do because they feel constantly bargained with, that almost feeling like people don't really understand the value of what they provide or the awesomeness of how they provide it. And usually that really stems from three things. People don't know how to differentiate, they don't niche down, and even if they understand the concept of niching, they hedge and they focus on multiple niches, and they create too much architecture around their business in different areas that actually leads the business to fail. And they don't know how to create a sales system that actually works. And when I say sales system, I don't mean learning bulldog techniques and hard closes. I'm an introvert, we can talk about that. And I learned to sell by using a sales system and process that allowed me to almost see it as an external process. I didn't need to have that gift of gab or the ability to be able to wing things. But what I find is people are so focused on their functional skill and getting better at the profession that they don't focus on these three things outside the scope of their functional skill that really allow them to get paid what they're worth.
You mentioned price and not selling to price. I think a lot of our audience, being business owners and high income salespeople, a lot of times they are, using stories to sell. Stories tend to get us off of price and onto key topics. Talk to me, and I know you're a big storyteller. Tell me a little bit about how the use of stories can kind of hit home with the niche that you're trying to present to your client.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we say story, a lot of people, again, think that they need hundreds of stories. They overdo it. I mean, I believe that a lot of businesses are one story away from the rapid growth business that they want. And what I mean by that is usually most businesses hit people with a fire hose of jargon when they meet them in a networking room. They hit people with a fire hose of jargon when they're in a sales meeting or in a podcast interview like this. And what they don't do is leverage the power of story to get people to see things from their point of view and really sidestep the price conversation by helping people see the value of what they provide through somebody's eyes, by making it tangible. And what I mean by that is when you tell somebody, I believe that I'll be able to help you in this way, or this way, people say, oh yeah, I can kind of see that, or they can disagree. Regardless, it kind of feels like a report of here's what I think I can do for you that they can either choose to accept or completely deny. And then it also comes down to rapport, what relationship they feel like they have with you and whether they can trust you. Story really allows us to sidestep all of that, because when somebody says, look, I'm trying to achieve this, or here's why I'm worried that it won't work for me, you can say something like, I perfectly understand. Last thing I want to do is waste any of your time. However, you actually remind me a lot of Sarah. And Sarah, when I first met her, she had the same concern. And then you can take people through this story of Sarah and how she almost didn't trust you, really speaking to their elephant that they just put in the room, and how now they're so happy, or how she is so happy that she did decide to trust you because now she has this amazing result. Now, when you tell stories, what actually happens is a couple of things. The first thing, for those people that aren't great at developing rapport, like I'm not, it actually activates what's called the reticular activating system of your brain. And this is super powerful. What it actually does is it allows the listener of the story and the teller of the story's brains to synchronize. It creates artificial rapport, which we can then turn into real rapport. Also, people remember up to 22 times more information when embedded into stories. When I used to sell telecommunications, I'd see sometimes 10 brochures on people's desks, and I'm out cold calling just like they were, but I knew they'd remember more of what I told them than those other people combined because I embedded it into a story. Also, stories force you to restrict how much information you give because you have to make it relevant to the story, and that makes it tangible to the person you speak to. But the real unfair advantage of storytelling is that when you tell a story, it literally short circuits the logical mind, and you speak directly to the emotional mind. The logical part's going, that'll work for me, that won't, I don't have time for this. The emotional brain literally short circuits the logical brain and goes, story time, and it just listens. And it assumes all the detail in the story is factual and just listens for the moral. And if the moral is we work with someone just like you who wanted what you want, and we got them to an amazing result, they are far more likely, and when I say far, hugely more likely to trust you and accept it, because you're not telling them that you think that it will help them. You're telling them somebody just like them in their situation got to a great result, and you believe that they're like them. And that really is what makes the difference. It makes it tangible. They can see themselves in the story, and they can't disagree with that person's experience, right, which makes them far more likely to accept it. So story is a superpower that really comes with the duty of care. Please use true and accurate stories because it gives you an unfair advantage over everybody else.
It's the old feel, felt, found technique, right? Understand how you feel. We've had many people that felt that way. I found that this is the outcome that they were desiring. Yeah, it's old school. I love it. Matthew, one of the things that we talked about briefly before jumping on this call was, Matthew, the rapid growth guy. Explain to people that may be thinking, hey, this is not the time for rapid growth. Like, there's a lot of uncertainty in the market. Tell me a little bit about, how you craft your message or how you help people, in any cycle. I mean, clearly we're, at least as a real estate guy, I feel pretty clearly that we are on the precipice of something negative, a correction potentially happening in real estate in 2024. I think a lot of people are fearful that, with the government slamming their foot on the brake, using the interest rates as their main driver to kind of slow the economy down. There are many businesses in a recession that could be impacted, and a recession could happen in the near future. Technically, I think we're in one in Q2 of 2023. Tell me a little bit about your messaging and how you help people through this time period.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the important thing here is that if you define yourself by your functional skill and you're trying to compete in a market where everybody sees you as the same as everyone else, this is going to be a really tough time for you. If, on the other hand, you're smarter about your messaging, then you can thrive in all economic areas and all economic times. So, and what I mean by that is that we've come from a period of real huge prosperity where you really didn't have to be that good at business, sales, marketing at all for for you to have a waiting list of clients or to have a waiting list of people that were ready for you to install whatever you install. And the reason for that is that, money was cheap, and the fact was that people were very bullish about where things were going, and people just didn't feel like it was ever going to come to an end. Now, I'm not saying it has come to an end. What I'm saying, though, is that you have to be smarter about the way you do things. And if you decide to be smarter at this time, the great news is when the economy booms again, you're going to be hugely advantaged over everyone else. But more importantly, right now, where a lot of people have this mindset of, look, I've just got to make enough money to pay for my team to retain them while we're going through this tough period, you're actually going to make a profit. But you have to take a step back and think very, very differently. And if you come from an industry where people really don't see the difference, whether you're an accountant, whether you're an attorney, whether you're a language tutor, if they don't see the difference between you and somebody else, it's going to be a very tough time, and people are going to hit you even more on price because they are price sensitive. That doesn't mean they're not making purchasing decisions, but you need to make it far more relevant to them. And I can give you an example, actually. I worked with a language coach out of California a few years ago, and she was teaching kids and adults Mandarin. And while, that market was bullish at the time, she was charging $50 to $80 an hour. And there were new people moving into California willing to charge $30 to $40 an hour for private consultation. So even in a prosperous economic time, people were still trying to save money. And they said, you know what, that's relatively the same advice as I'm getting here. So I'm going to pay $30 to $40 an hour. At least that's what they thought from when somebody was selling it to them, because defining herself by a functional skill, they saw it all as the same. Now, not only that, she had to deal with the fact that there were now, thanks to the global economy we live in, people in China offering to do it for $12 an hour on Craigslist. And now, thanks to our friends in Silicon Valley, there are people online, I'll teach you Mandarin, you teach me English. So, we just won't charge anyone anything. So she's competing against free. So she comes to me, she says, Matt, how do I compete in this newly saturated market where price seems to be the only factor? And the answer is, like for like, you're always going to have that fight. But you can avoid the battle altogether. So what I did is I looked through all the clients that she'd worked with over the years, and she'd worked with hundreds, but there were 2 people, and these were executives being relocated to China. She helped with far more than just language tuition. Now, these were executives that really, they were daunted about going to China, and she helped them really understand 3 major things. The first thing was the difference between e-commerce in China and the Western world, the respect requirement, like how to handle a business card, why it matters so much, how to reduce your accent, not just learn the language, because it's all about respect there. And more importantly, the difference of rapport. So, if I was trying to sell you something, for instance, in the Western world, maybe if I'm a really bad sales rep, after 45 minutes, I'll say something horrible like, do you want to move forward? And you might say yes or no, but you also might say, let me think about it. If I reach out to you in a week's time and you're still thinking, I know my chances of getting that sale are going down and down. Yet in China, they want to see you 5 or 6 times before they discuss business. They're probably going to want to see you drunk over karaoke once or twice. It's just who they are, but that's because they're talking 20 to 50-year deals, not transactional relationships like we do here. And I'm like, Wendy, stop. You're doing so much more for these people than just language tuition. And everybody here listening today, by the way, is also. Think of all those people that sing your praises. They wouldn't do that unless they felt like they were getting value beyond what they thought they were going to get, and that warrants your price tag. So I said, is it fair to assume that these people are going to be more successful in China, Wendy? And she's like, well, yeah, that's the point, right? I said, great, then let's call you the China Success Coach. As a matter of fact, let's forget about the Mandarin piece altogether. Let's create what we ended up calling a China Success Intensive. That was a 5-week program that's literally was delivered to the business, to the executive being relocated, and all of the people in the family being relocated as well. And I said to her, how do you feel about that? She's like, well, I like the idea, but she's like, well, who do I sell it to though? And I said, well, actually, let's think about that. Who do you think you should sell it to? And she's like, well, obviously the executive. Now, she's asking me, who do I go networking for? Who do I sell to when I'm out and about? And I just didn't feel that was the right target. I said to her, I'm sure they're terrified moving, to China. I was terrified moving from Australia to the US. I don't feel it's the right client. She's like, well, obviously the company would pay. I'm like, yeah, they've got millions of dollars riding on an executive being successful. Sure. I still don't think it's the right person. Frustrated now. She's like, well, who then? And I said, well, I just think it's the immigration attorney. She looked at me puzzled. I'm like, think about it for a second. These people are making $5,000 to $7,000. They've got to do the visa. They've got to deal with the bureaucracy that comes with that. They've got to handle the staff. They've got to pay for an office. They've got to pay to get a client because marketing often isn't free. Neither is sales. I said, they'd be lucky to make $3,000. I said, so I would just go and speak to them. So she started reaching out to immigration attorneys, going to networking events, and they loved the idea. They're like, double my profit for a simple introduction? What have I got to say? And she said, well, all you've got to do is say, congratulations, you've now got your visa. I just want to double check you're as ready as possible to be relocated to China. And the executives would think they were okay, but they'd quickly help them realize that there was a lot more to it than just learning the language, getting the visa, and having a place to move into. And they'd just say, I think you need to speak to the China Success Coach. And for that, she offered them a $3,000 commission check, but she charged $30,000 when she sold this product. So she made $27,000 for the easiest sale in the world instead of struggling to charge $50 to $80 an hour every single day. So in a recession economy, she would have been blown out of the market. She probably wouldn't be there by the end of it. Yep. But as the China Success Coach, now, she really is at a marketplace of one. She's got all these people sending her leads, and it really comes down to this. Ask yourself, what are the things you do outside the scope of your functional skill that people really appreciate? And then, what is the higher level benefit of that? For Wendy, it was rapport, respect, and e-commerce. The higher level benefit was China Success. For me, if I call myself a sales coach, people are going to think that I'm one step above a scam artist, depending on what they think about sales. If I say I'm in marketing, they're going to go, oh, I need that. What do you charge? And I'm much more than that. But when I call myself the rapid growth guy, the simplicity of that message gets me heard in a crowded marketplace, not just offline, but online too. I don't have to work anywhere near as hard, which also makes me more profitable, which is what I define rapid growth to be, more profit.
Well said. It's a branding exercise then, is that fair?
100%. Well, so when you think about sales, if you think about rapid growth altogether. Now, there are a couple of ways to obtain rapid growth. One is you can get your costs down, you can become more efficient. That all allows you to become more profitable, and more profit is definitely rapid growth, especially if you can create a huge amount of profit. But on the other side, better marketing and better ability to close deals, that creates rapid growth as well. And that is really where I specialize and where I help people see that the first piece is really what a lot of people focus on, because that's alongside their functional skill. But these are the pillars: differentiation, niche marketing, and sales systemization. All of that is helped by having a lot of the heavy lifting done before you even start, by making sure that people see you as the only logical choice for you not to have any competition, right? The number of people I see start with sales, if Wendy had started with sales, she would have already lost. So you have to start from a point of branding and differentiation.
Mate, The Introvert's Edge is over your left and right shoulder, and it's a book that you've just become so passionate about. As confident a speaker as you are, some would be surprised to learn that you're actually an introvert. Is that correct?
Well, so absolutely is your answer. Yes, I am an introvert. And I think, let's confront the stigma around introversion here for a second, because, and don't get me wrong, I've read books on introversion that make it sound like I have some form of condition that I'm just never going to get beyond. But the truth is that introversion doesn't mean that there's going to be this constant struggle. I mean, sure, I find certain things harder. I find other things much easier than perhaps the extroverts. Like, some might say that extroverts aren't the best listeners. They potentially aren't the most empathetic. The difference is they believe they can learn these skills. We as introverts often believe we can't sell, we can't public speak. Introversion is just this, where you draw your energy. For instance, at the end of this podcast, I am going to be a little bit spent and I'm going to need a charge up time. If I was to speak at an event, at the end of that day, I'm going to be a lot tireder than the average extrovert. The average extrovert will probably be excited to go to the bar with all the people that are there. Me, I'm going to be excited about going home and putting on Netflix and watching a bit of television. So what happens though is people see somebody that is extrovert, or somebody they see as extroverted, and they're like, well, I can never be as successful as that person, because they clearly have that natural ability. I definitely didn't have that natural ability. I had a reading speed of a 6th grader in light high school. I was super introverted. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. But I fell into a job after losing my other job just before Christmas. I fell into door-to-door sales, and there was no other option. I taught myself how to sell watching YouTube videos, and I focused on a methodical system. Because for me, if I had to just focus on relying on Lady Luck, and hopefully tomorrow will be better than today, that would have been horrifying for me emotionally, but also it would have taken all the rejection personally. So I focused on spending, and I wouldn't wish this on anyone, but I mean, it was $93 before my first sale, but I focused 8 hours a day on practicing what I'd learned, and 8 hours at night perfecting the next step in the process, or working on the one I was already focused on. And I would do that day in, day out. Weekends, I would spend 16 hours practicing. But very quickly, it was $43, then $28, then $17, and then $9. Eventually, I got it down to making a sale on average every $3. And 6 weeks later, I had my manager pull me aside, and I thought I was going to get fired for doing something wrong, because he just looked like something was wrong. And then he told me I was the #1 salesperson in the largest sales and marketing company in the Southern Hemisphere. So the thing that I want people to know is, just because you're introverted doesn't mean you can't do these things. It's just our path to success is different than that of an extrovert. Now, extroverts can excel and they can learn empathy and they can learn active listening. They need to focus on learning those strategies though. But introverts can also learn to do all of these, what I would say are so-called extroverted arenas, like sales, networking, public speaking, coaching, those sorts of things. And I say so-called because I believe that introverts, when they learn a planned system, they actually outperform most of their extroverted counterparts, because it becomes methodical. And that's why I say introverts are just amazing salespeople. But if you don't believe me, I mean, let's look at some other introverts that you may not know are introverted. You think you can't do small talk? Well, David Letterman and Oprah Winfrey are introverted. You think you can't network? Ivan Misner, the founder of the world's largest networking group in the world, BNI, is introverted. You think you can't sell? Well, I'm telling you that you can. I know half of the people on the global guru list of top 30, which I'm honored to be on, most of them are introverted. But also Zig Ziglar, the most well-known sales trainer on the planet. Well, former, he's no longer with us, but he is introverted as well, or was introverted as well. So when you're thinking about introversion, what I want you to know, if you think you are introverted and you can't do these things, you're looking at a lot of people that are introverted and projecting extroversion upon them. And maybe they're not talking about introversion, but that doesn't mean they're not introverted. So I want you to know that you can, and it's actually far easier than you think. And just by following a methodical process, you'll actually find it really, you can advance yourself at speed. Just most people don't know that they can, and then aren't willing to put the effort into doing it.
We've talked about sales, and you mentioned briefly there networking. Networking is often seen as a skill primarily that benefits extroverts, yet you emphasize the importance of networking for introverted entrepreneurs. Can you provide like some insight on how introverts can approach networking differently, and that skill specifically being so meaningful to sales and growth?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, firstly, if you're not networking, then you're probably not growing your business, right? You have to continue to grow your network. I think a lot of introverts avoid it. I actually think a lot of extroverts avoid it too, because the way people view networking, to me, is very transactional and it's wrong. I see a lot of extroverts that believe they're successful, but they're walking around the room almost going, do you want to buy from me? No, what about you? What about you? What about you? And it's horrible, which is why you see a lot of extroverts even do what I call aimless networking, which is where they have these kind of shallow conversations with people, and there are sometimes what they do, and they'll even put themselves down and they'll say, oh, my day job is this. Like, why would you say that? It's like, oh, I'm not interested in what I do, but I hope you are, right? It doesn't work. And that's why a lot of people think that networking just doesn't work for them, because they keep walking home with piles of business cards where they're like, well, if they call me, I'll work with them. But of course they never do, because you didn't know how to articulate your value. Now, extroverts do a little bit better at this, the transactional ones, because at least they're willing to try and create a sales conversation. That doesn't make it right. It just means that is what most people think to do. Now, let's put it in perspective of the way the average person does it that has practiced a script of some sort. Now, an extrovert might just spew information at you, and that is more successful than avoiding the topic of what you do altogether. But the way networking is taught is saying something like, I do this for this group of people, even if they have this common objection. i.e., I help small business owners obtain growth in sales, even if they think they're terrible at it, right? It sounds horrible. It sounds contrived. And it's all about me. It's like I'm trying to share my resume, talk about how amazing I am, which is for the introverts, hugely uncomfortable. Taking into account what I just said about unified message and knowing your niche. See, now I know that I love helping small business owners. This is what I was put on this earth to do. However, I also love helping introverts because I believe that they feel that they can't succeed. And I think there's something heroic, especially about an introvert, but any small business owner, that really has enough faith in themselves and talent to go and start a business of their own, because they're taking a huge risk, and I want to support that group. So I say I specialize with helping introverted service provider business owners, because that's the group I really love to help most. Now, the reason I use the word specialize, and this is important. I don't say I work exclusively with, because that cuts out that whole demographic. I say I specialize, so this group sees me as the only logical choice, but I'm just as vanilla as everybody else outside that group. As a matter of fact, what you'll see in a second, because I speak from such passion, actually makes those people try and recruit me to their team. Oh, I'm an extroverted business owner with a product. Can you help me too? Because I really love what you said. It doesn't cut me out. And that's why niching is also so vitally important. But when I'm at a networking event, I say something as simple as, so firstly, you should be interested before you're interesting. But then when somebody asks me, they might say, oh my gosh, Matthew, I've been talking to you for 20 minutes about what I do. I haven't even asked you what it is that you do. What is that? I'll just say, I'm the rapid growth guy. Full stop. Like I said, I'm an accountant or an attorney, and they should know what that is. Now, because I've been interested, and because our brains are structured in a way that we can't not understand what box to filter something in, people will say, well, what exactly is that? And I'll say, well, one of the things I love to see more than anything, it is an amazing business owner with enough talent, skill, and belief in themselves to start a business of their own. But what I find more often than not, and I just hate seeing this, is they end up stuck in this endless hamster wheel of struggling to find interesting people, trying to set themselves apart, trying to make the sale, feeling like people only care about one thing, price. Do you know anyone like that? Now, of course, if I've gone to the right networking event, the room's full of introverted small business owners that are service providers, or at least small business owners themselves, which means that more often than not, they're going to say yes. And then I say, well, I'm on a mission to help introverted service providers specifically, but really anybody that has a business realize that they really can create a rapid growth business doing what they love, but not by focusing on their functional skill. Usually they're amazing at that, but instead by focusing on 3 things outside the scope of their functional skill to truly allow them to attain the rapid growth business that they deserve, really one that revolves around them, their family, and their life. Actually, you know what? Let me give you an example. Now, the reason I'm able to frame it that way is because I know my niche and because I have a unified message. So once you have those, I've then built it into a script that's actually not about me. Notice I didn't even tell you what I do. I just said what I'm passionate about, the change I want to see in the world, and the mission that I'm on. Introverts do not mind talking about the mission that they're on and the change they want to see in the world. They hate bragging about themselves. Now, while this is a strategy that works amazingly for introverts because it allows them to deliver something in an authentic way and feel congruent when doing it, it also works for extroverts because it's less confrontational, it's less salesy, it's less contrived, and it feels more of a natural conversation. And of course, it lends itself to going straight into a story, which maybe I'll tell the story of Wendy straight after that. So when you're thinking about networking, face-to-face network is the perfect place to validate your messaging works. But the truth is that once you have this messaging, it's the same old saying, if you can't be the clearest, you have to be the loudest. So that's why you have loud people in networking that are going to lots of networking events. It's the same online. That's why people are blogging every day, having podcasts every day. But if you're the clearest, you don't have to be the loudest. And because of that, I go to very few networking events. I'm strategic about it. I run my message well, and I've researched the people before I even go to those networking events, which is a huge key skill that I'm surprised so few people do. But then online, I do the same thing. I use that messaging, and because of that, it breaks through the noise and gets me heard in a crowded marketplace. It gets people to chase me. And that is really what means you're recession proof, because if you've got people chasing you, rain, hail, or shine, you'll always have a waiting list of people chasing you. But if you're a vanilla person that is just relying on being the loudest in the market, well, people come recession time, they don't care how loud you are, they're not buying it.
Mate, one thing that you said that I don't want people to just gleam over, you said you've got to be interested before you're interesting, before not interesting, right? So you've got to be interested in someone before you become interesting, or before you start bragging about how interesting you are. I think at networking events, the mistake that some make is they go there trying to either close someone right there, and I think we could take a page out of the Japanese or Chinese playbook of trying to do things a little bit slower with more intention, that you're really there to try and get a connection perhaps down the road. I mean, I don't know about you, but in so many networking events, when you're meeting there, you're trying to have a discussion and say, oh, hey, buddy, how are you? And you get interrupted here and interrupted there. And so it's really not an apropos time to start going deep with someone, right?
First thing is it's disastrous to go deep with someone. So the number one thing I tell people all the time is networking is a marketing activity, not a sales activity. You're not there to sell, you're there to foster and generate relationships. Yeah. And funnily enough, when people will say to me, oh my gosh, Matt, I'm exactly like Wendy. I need what Wendy, what you did for Wendy. How do I work with you? My number one response is, well, I appreciate you asking, and I'd love to have that conversation with you, but we're all here networking right now. It's not really the right time. So, we've all got our phones with us. Why don't we set up a time to have a coffee, or we'll set up a time to have a virtual call, and you can block it into your schedule, and that's job done. Right now, I can have a conversation, and I role play this with people all the time, and even though I tell them this, I will role play and I'll ask that question, and then they start talking about what they do. And I literally say, I listen for a second, and then I go, oh, John, great to see you. Oh, sorry, mate, I'll be with you in a second. And it throws the whole mood off, but it's always going to happen in a networking room. The moment you go into sales, you really have killed that relationship. If you don't get interrupted, which is likely 90% chance of that happening, if you don't get interrupted, they're still going to remember they went there to network to grow their business and you pitched them at that event. Forever, that will have an echo into what they're willing to pay you, and likely, even if they do say yes, they may not follow up with you. So it's not in your best interest to do that. I would always set up a follow-up meeting. Now, that being said, networking really isn't about these types of relationships, right? So these transactional deals, or finding potential prospects, it's only one part of the networking equation. The real ticket out of the hamster wheel is these other two, which is momentum partnerships and champion relationships. See, momentum partners and momentum partners is really valuable. So that might be somebody that believes in your work and introduce you to podcast hosts that they think that you might be a great fit on. They might be somebody that's willing to get you in front of their audience. It might be somebody that is constantly introducing you to people that they're working with because they see your business as a perfect fit, and you potentially do the same for them. Now, it's not a formal agreement because I hate those kind of tit for tat relationships, but it's more of a general, I believe in what you do, you believe in what I do, and I keep recommending and you do the same because we see the benefit in each other's services. Those momentum partnerships are amazing. As a matter of fact, I've got an example in my book of a lady called Judy Robinette who became a momentum partner of mine. I gave her some assistance to increase her keynote fee and close more deals, and she really appreciated that, and she started introducing me to podcasts. And then I started introducing her. And for years, we did that. I mean, between us, we probably made hundreds of thousands of dollars for each other. Yet neither of us actually shook hands and said that's what we were going to do. We just did it because we understood that kind of relationship is important. And then you've got your relationships of champions. These are people that are high level, that give your work credibility. Now, Ivan Meisner is a champion of my work. He endorsed my book. I've been on his BNI podcast many times. And, I'm always getting in business and clients and introductions just because of my association with Ivan. I mean, if Ivan asked me to go and pick up his laundry, I would do it for him. But we have that kind of relationship that he sees the value in me, I see the value in him. But he's a much higher credibility person, and he's got a lifetime of experience behind his endorsements, and those are very valuable as well. And when you talk to Ivan, he says the number one thing that keeps happening when I go to networking events is people keep trying to put me, I might be at a BNI event, and people are trying to put me in the client box. Like, why would you do that? So what you've got to realize is when you're at a networking event, first, yes, let's go back and say, if you're the one that starts talking about what you do, first, you've kind of lost. Be interested in them. Ask them questions. If you're an introvert, empathize with some of the things they say and ask follow-up questions. If you're an extrovert, practice active listening and try and do the same, or come up with a series of questions that are more follow-on rather than darting around so that you can practice that. But once they've been talking about themselves, you can offer them a little bit of guidance, offer them some introductions, right? Really get involved with what they're saying. Eventually, they're going to ask you what you do. That's when you want to have a unified message like the China Success Coach, the Rapid Growth Guy, and then go into a spiel. And at the end of that, the goal is, if you have to, there'll be a prospect for you. But ideally, when you go networking, what you really want is momentum partners and champion relationships, because that means you don't have to go networking as much, because they're going to open more doors without you having to go back into a room. And that's really the thesis of my book. Get your message right, develop the right relationships so that you never have to go back to a networking room unless you want to go.
How do you find that people find that clarity? And is that introspective? Is it talking with their clients? Hey, how do you see me? What value have I driven to you?
Yeah, it's actually a really interesting question, because a lot of people devalue the things that they're amazing at and hold in high esteem the things they worked really hard to learn that perhaps aren't natural. So a lot of times it is hard for people to see. And I, actually would suggest pick up the phone and call your clients that have, and there's actually an exercise that I would recommend everybody do. And you don't need to hire me for this. I mean, if you go to matthewpollard.com/growth, this template will actually help you break down your higher paying clients, the clients that sing your praises, and really think through who your best clients are. And this exercise is actually designed to help you create your unified message and discover your niche of willing to buy clients. And whenever I do this, I did it at an event recently, 200 people in the room, and at the end of the session, I said, look, put your hand up if you now believe you have a unified message and you've identified a niche of willing and wanting to buy clients. And like 97% of the room put their hands up, which sounds amazing until I tell you the session was only 90 minutes long. And I said, look, just do me a favor, keep your hand up if this is the most time you've ever spent actively working on your marketing. And like 85% of the room kept their hands up. I mean, that's horrific. Everybody consumes information over and over. They read 1,000 books. I see it on all the time. I've read 20 books in the last 2 months. Well, great. How many of you applied?
Yeah.
So for people that are listening, if you go to matthewpollard.com/growth, download that template, get somebody else to listen to this podcast episode though, and team up with them. Because a lot of times the issue is getting out of your functional skill, which is you kind of got to get out of your own head. So if you're a business coach, don't do this with another business coach. If you're an attorney, don't do it with another attorney. But marry up with somebody that's outside your functional skill and go through this exercise to create your unified message and your niche. But when you decide on your niche, and this happens all the time, people say, for this group of people, they sing my praises and they pay me amazing money. But for the life of me, I don't understand why. Well, then pick up the phone and ask them and say to them, look, I was working with a coach, and for everyone here, feel free to absolutely blame me, right? Anyone listening to this, feel free to blame me and just say, I've been working with a coach and they told me to identify my best clients and your name came up. So firstly, I just want to thank you for being one of my long-term or one of my favorite clients and always supporting me. I so appreciate it. Let them enjoy that for a second. And then say something like, now I hope I'm not bringing up an elephant in the room, but looking at the work that we've done with you, I'm definitely not the cheapest in the industry. I really would love to know what you see in me that I perhaps don't see in myself, because what I'm trying to do is create more clients just like you and not have some of those problem child clients that I have. And I really want to understand what it is that gets you to sing my praises and to constantly never worry about my bills because you appreciate my work. What is that? And you'll always get a very basic answer. Oh, you're just so knowledgeable, Tom. Or, you've got great customer service, Sarah. That's not the answer. What you need to do is go deeper than that. You need to say something like, John, I really appreciate you saying that I'm really knowledgeable. What specifically do you recognize about my knowledge that's been helpful to you? And you'll always find the answers come. I worked with a printing company that literally found two clients. It's funny, I've said the number 2 twice. It's actually quite funny how often the number of clients that fit in that box is actually really small, but you've got like 200 clients and only 2 you like. And sometimes, especially this guy, it was like 90% of his profit. He had hundreds of clients. 90% of his profit margin came from just 2 clients, yet he was so worried about getting other clients, but he didn't know which clients, so he was just getting them all. So all of his stress and all of his staff really serviced everybody else. So he got on a phone and the answer was, he was a printing company, but these 2 companies were education companies. And because of that, when they said he's really knowledgeable. What did they mean by that? Well, he had worked with them for so long and noticed that whenever they sent him a manual, they'd always forget to add things like page numbers or tables of contents or other specific things. So he'd created a document to just check that because he got sick of them calling, going, this was missing, can you quickly print these things, and stressing his team out. But they appreciated that because they'd had staff break down because they're in classes and they're saying now, oh gosh, there's no page numbers. I don't even know how to tell my students in the class how to get to the part of the manual that I need them to get to. And it was really stressful for them. And he helped fix that. The other thing he did that was just amazing that they said, and this is what they called great customer service. But what he decided is they were doing a lot of education courses at hotels. So they'd be traveling all over America. And quite frequently, what would happen is he would try and deliver that, and the hotel would say, oh, look, sorry, we can only accept deliveries 2 days before. And so what most printing companies would do was just send the education company all the manuals and say, you have to deal with it because we can't time that correctly. He would not only time it correctly, he'd call the hotel to make sure they got it. He would actually negotiate extra time so it could be there well in advance. This reduced the stress of that company. And more than that, he even allowed them to submit things within shorter than normal times so that he could get them processed and delivered to make sure that it all worked. These are the things that they appreciated. So what happened is we realized that this was his real separation inside the printing industry. So we called him the Workbook Factory, and we built his whole branding around that, and that's how he grew his business. So when you think about it, a lot of times, and it's funny, I work in the trades, builders, plumbers, electricians, printers, doctors, lawyers, it doesn't matter who they are, every single time they say, especially introverts, because they can be very humble. There's actually, I don't know what it is, or I don't even think there is something. I'm exactly like everyone else. And that is never true. People always have unique experiences, unique past customers, unique qualifications that perfectly qualify them to help a demographic of people. The problem is they spend all their time helping so many, it all just blurs and it's a mess. What you've got to do is get clear on who's singing your praises and who appreciates your value and is willing to pay you what you're worth. And then if you can't figure it out for yourself, which often you will, pick up the phone and call them. And you know what? They're going to be ecstatic that you asked because they sing your praises all the time and they can't believe that you don't know. And they have probably been looking for a great opportunity to thank you. And now is your time. People always underestimate the value of the little things that they do because they don't see the direct benefit. But once you understand that direct benefit, you can speak to it. And that makes sales so much easier because you can speak to the pain and then you can speak to the outcome. For that workbook company, imagine one story about these trainers that are there with no page numbers or the workbooks didn't arrive. And now all of a sudden, everything's sorted. They've got this stringent checking system and we always check with the hotels that they arrived. Isn't that enough to pay a little bit more? Of course it is.
Matt, failure is often a part of someone's journey, and most frame it in the terms of a stepping stone to success. I mean, you started off talking a little bit about how you went 93 doors, in your first sales role, trying to perfect and learn and grow. How do you coach entrepreneurs to deal with failure? And it's so easy to say, every no, you're closer to a yes. But is it a mindset thing, or do you always tell them to go back and practically work at the steps needed to improve?
So we must always reflect. Now, introverts can sometimes use this in a negative way. For instance, what happens is we go to a networking event, it doesn't work out. That night we go and ruminate on it and we beat ourselves up about it. So it's sometimes better to reflect on it tomorrow rather than when you're emotionally charged today. That being said, I'm a big believer in positive thinking, but I'm also a big believer on systems and process. So when I went and did 93 doors, and let's put it this way, I had a 5-day product training, not a single second of sales training. I get thrown on this road called Sydney Road in Melbourne, Australia, like 1,000 doors on each side. It's ridiculous. And I just got told to go and sell. And the first door, I thought it was horrible after walking out because, he politely told me to leave and I felt painfully rejected. But in the next door, I was sworn at. That was definitely worse. My personal favorite was always getting told to go and get a real job, right? So, it was the only job I could get. But door after door, that kept happening. And when I made my first sale at door 93, I'd made $70 and I was ecstatic for about 45 seconds. And I think here's what happens. People will say, okay, sales is a natural ability, so I just have to learn, I just have to hope tomorrow's going to be better. And I went, no, that means everything is going to be terrible. So I chose to take responsibility for the problem. And I chose to make a decision that sales was a system, just like anything else. And then I chose to lean into that saying by Henry Ford, if you think you can or if you think you can't, you're right. And I went, you know what? I'm going to have to think that sales is a system because without that, my year is going to be horrific. And then I went looking and I went, well, I got a reading speed of a 6th grader. I'm not exactly likely to pick up a book like a Brian Tracy or a Zig Ziglar book, and this was before podcasts. But then I went, what about YouTube? Because I had that open mind of everything is going to work out and I will find a way, I was right. I found a system and then I put good and hard work behind it. What I find is a lot of business owners are they've got their head in the sand. They're willing to work hard, but they're willing to work hard doing what they do, right? They're not willing to step out of their comfort zone and say, hey, I can't do this thing called sales, or, I'm really, really bad at digital marketing, or whatever it is. They're not willing to take a step back and say, okay, let's learn the process in the system. So I am a big believer on working hard for a short period of time so you don't have to work hard again. But what I find is people love the grind. They brag about the grind, and that's great as long as you're actually building a system or a process or you're following best practice. What I find is most people wing things, and that makes the grind totally pointless because while you may luck upon it, the success rate, go buy a lottery ticket, right? It's just as painful. So what I would recommend for people is anything that you're struggling with, make the decision to take responsibility, find a system and process or a methodology that works. And again, you don't have to hire me or anyone else to do that. I learned how to sell on YouTube, right? There are so many ways to find a system and process and then put work behind it. Now, Sales and many other things are not like mixed martial arts, right? If you read 6 or 7 sales books and then try and piece everything together, all you're going to do is confuse yourself. This is what's called busy procrastination in my mind. So regardless of whether you pick up my book on sales, my book on networking, or somebody else's, what you want to do is find one system that you can trust and focus on and put together the basic widget. Get the sale off the line, get the networking system off the line so you feel like you've got a methodical process. Once you've got a minimum success rate in that, then bolt on other things to make it better and better. What people do is they focus on understanding it as much as they can to create perfection, and they never get to the understanding of perfection. So there's too many red lights in the future. They're not willing to press the go button today, and that's where things go wrong. So it's a willingness to take responsibility, a willingness to do the work, and a positive mindset, but also picking a system quickly and then workshopping that. That's what I found I've carried into everything. So for sales, it absolutely worked for me. But what I found is, for me, my reading speed when I was a child was an issue. Sales was an issue for me. The world never really worked for me. So every time something didn't work, I had to take a step back, take responsibility, and find a new path forward. And what I find is, for most people, when something doesn't work, they just say, well, I can't do that. I'll have to focus on other things. And they get back to the busy work of their business that they do enjoy, but that creates catastrophe in their business. If not 5 years ago, definitely in these tougher times.
Mate, the 2 more questions, and then just so appreciate this insight today. There's so many gems you're dropping. One of the reasons I named my podcast Mistake-Free Real Estate, very much tongue-in-cheek, right? Because there's no such thing as a mistake-free business. Can you share with us one of the mistakes you've made in your business, or something that you lucked into or were able to spin it and turn it and learn from a mistake? I think too many people think that, a guy as successful as you that's got this great coaching program has just done everything right, and it's this linear path. I want to encourage people that in any business, it's not linear. It's very much ups and downs. And Daniel Marcos talks about running to the abyss, because you go up and then there's an abyss and you climb through, and then you get to another one, you go up and there's another abyss. But tell me a little bit about a mistake you've made in business and how you were able to overcome.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's an easy one. And I'm going to throw a little bit of a different one at you. So after I started to succeed in sales, they threw me into a management position. I don't know why people think that when you can sell, you can manage. I was given a team of 20 and just just teach them. It'll be fine. And I'm like, well, I don't even know how to train salespeople. I'm like, we just throw them up against the wall. It's commission-only sales. Don't worry about it. Just figure it out. Well, every person in that group quit within 24 hours. So I went back to YouTube to learn how to manage, and I got pretty good at it. I got promoted about 7 times. And then I went and started up my own business doing telecommunications. And actually, I'll save the lesson for later. Fast forward just shy of 3 years, I built the largest brokership for B2B cell phones in the country. And I'd won this thing called the Young Achiever Award in Australia. And to me, that meant success, right? When I got that award, I'm like, this is the one thing that really is going to show all the people back home that thought I was kind of slow that I was worth something. And I remember grabbing that award, being really excited, going home and being miserable. And what I realized is, the truth is, you can create rapid growth out of anything, but there is nothing worse than a rapid growth business with customers you don't like in a business you can't stand. Now, what's interesting is I say I've been responsible for 5 multi-million-dollar success stories, and that sounds awesome. But the truth is that some of those didn't make me happy. And that iterative process of getting closer to what I love and connecting with my passion and my mission, because the truth is that if you're making great money but it doesn't fill your soul, some people I guess can live with that. But for me, I really couldn't. So for me, I started to hate the businesses that I'd created because I just didn't love them. So for the people that are listening, I would say, right, everybody's so worried about creating rapid growth in their business, and that is really important. But it's important that you authentically care about the business, because you have to do it for a long time. And the only thing I can say that's worse than a boss you don't like is being the boss in a business you don't like.
Love that. Well, along those lines, my final question is always the same. And man, I haven't prepped you on this, but I'm a golfer. I enjoy the tranquility of getting out on the golf course. And I also enjoy the camaraderie of enjoying 4 hours with someone that you choose to go spend that time with. I'm going to put you on the spot and just think of a dream foursome. Whether you're a golfer or not, the theory is that you pick 3 people that you'd love to go spend 4 hours with. You've thrown out some gems today, Brian Tracy and Zig Ziglar. I don't know if they would make your cut, but if you had to spend 4 hours on a golf course with some people that would either inspire you or motivate you, or maybe you've learned from them or would like to learn from them, living or past, who would those 3 people be?
You know, that's a really interesting question. And funnily enough, you're talking to an Australian that really had, outside the people that I worked with in my business, had no real network. And then when it came to the US, I mean, I get to rub shoulders and hang out with some of the people that I remember my parents talking about the books that they'd written, right? So I really do get to hang out with some amazing people. So I'm going to cut all of those off the list, right? Because I get to hang out with those anyway. People like Kerwin Ray. Kerwin Ray is a business growth guy. He's super cool out of Australia. Shay Rosebottom, she's a LinkedIn expert that is amazing. And then probably a Tony Robbins. I'd probably, but not when he's up on stage, probably when he's being a little bit more chilled and being a little bit more real. But, I think that would be a good group of people because, there are people that are actually doing things every day. And I think that's one of the things that I really appreciate. For me, one of the slogans for when I speak from stage is that you're talking to a guy that's actually done it. And I think a lot of people that get on stage, they haven't, or they haven't done it in a very long time. And all of those people are still very, very active, doing amazing things.
Mate, you're so passionate about what you do, and you're just driving rapid growth to so many different industries. I love that you're kind of industry agnostic and can help people from all different walks of life. So for that, I thank you and appreciate you being on the podcast today. Thanks so much for spending some time, Matt.
Mate, it's been my absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Cheers.